animals, talking animals, talking animals. It walks like an animal, talks like an animal, must be an animal. Come hear the animals, talking animals, talking animals.
Good morning, this is Talking Animals on WMNF. I'm Duncan Strauss. My guest today will be science journalist Stephen S. Hall, who in a career spanning more than 4 decades has published numerous cover stories in the New York Times Magazine, while also writing for The New Yorker, The Atlantic Monthly, National Geographic, and a slew of other prominent publications. Hall is also the author of several books, most recently Slither, How Nature's Most Maligned Creatures Illuminate Our World. At first glance, Slither might appear to nominally be just another snake book. Well, it is a book about snakes, but it's 100 miles from a standard reptile handbook. Hall is clearly propelled by colossal ambition, applying research and reporting that roams far and wide and deep. This enables him to deliver a bracing treatise on serpents that itself slithers deftly through history, religion, literature, mythology, and plenty of science, of course, making a compelling case for reassessing our view of snakes, that they may be quote-unquote maligned because they are misunderstood or undervalued, and sometimes impulsively dismissed over fears fostered by traits as fundamental as their menacing appearance. Plus, Hall is a masterful writer. His breezy conversational style makes reading Slither a far more winning experience than even the I Hate Snakes contingent would likely have anticipated. It's quite a book, which I look forward to discussing when I speak with Stephen S. Hall in just a moment here on Talking Animals on WMNF. Coming up later in today's program, I'll talk with H.H. German, the creator of Calico, the first comic book hero dedicated to fighting animal abuse. I've spoken with H.H. periodically since he launched the first Calico series nearly 5 years ago. I think Talking Animals should spotlight and support the first comic book hero who battles animal abuse, don't you? H.H. is unveiling a new Calico chapter book featuring the work of 2 major figures in the comic book world, Mike Baron and Klaus Janson. More on this when I speak with H.H. Sherman later in today's program. Right now, though, let's discuss snakes as depicted in a singular book, Slither, with its author, Stephen S. Hall. With a reminder that I invite you to join the conversation by calling 813-239-9663, emailing dj@wmnf.org, or texting 813-433-0885. Let's welcome Stephen S. Hall to Talking Animals on WMNF. Good morning, Stephen.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on Talking Animals, and congrats on the book. Not only a fascinating read, but as I noted in the introduction, it's a fun, breezy read, which many folks could be excused for finding surprising when it comes to a snake book, I suppose.
Well, they're really interesting animals, and I thought it would be, I know a lot of people don't like them, but I thought an interesting challenge would get them to learn more and hopefully maybe change their minds if they didn't happen to like snakes, because they're absolutely fascinating creatures. Beautiful, diverse, very adaptable to their environment, and have some things to tell us both biologically and culturally if we listen to them.
Yeah, well, you may have already answered kind of what my initial question might be was, you know, how you sort of initially approached the book, like what the game plan was. But it sounds like part of the game plan was trying to sell people on why they should be more interested in snakes, or at least more open to snakes than maybe many people tend to be.
I thought it would be an interesting challenge. We obviously talk about habitat destruction and conservation and alleviating stresses that might cause extinction in various species. And obviously there are a lot of species of animals that are under threat for a variety of reasons that I think we know about, in climate change and habitat destruction and so on. But I thought the challenge of, increasing perhaps empathy or at least care for an animal that people don't like creates an interesting conservation argument. And the notion essentially is that we shouldn't save animals, I don't think, species by species. I think we're talking about really complex and fragile ecological webs in which all sorts of creatures contribute to the sort of homeostatic hum of the ecology. And snakes are a really important part of that. And if we kill them or we eliminate their habitats, we're actually not only attacking one species, but in fact we're destabilizing an entire ecology.
Wow, yeah, no, that seems like a worthy philosophical approach to taking people into the book and taking them through kind of key points. Are you hearing any kind of additional sound on your end, Stephen? Or any kind of weird, like, audio sort of streaks or whatever?
I am not.
Okay. Well, I am a little bit on this end. If it continues, I might try to call you back and just, I don't know if it's on your end or I don't think it's on our end, but
Okay.
I don't think it's hugely distracting, but there is kind of a periodic, like not quite echo, but some kind of sound that periodically pops up as you're talking. So
Okay.
anyway, let's proceed for now at least. So the book is really brimming with so many intriguing scenes and revelations. I mean, we just can't possibly cover them all in our time here today. So one way to dive into our conversation is by way of noting pythons come up in at least two significant ways in Slither, and we can circle back to the perhaps more familiar problem of pythons running rampant in and around the Everglades, certainly familiar to Floridians of my kind and others. But can you talk about the way pythons eat, how big their meal could be, where that meal might be, and how that's kind of scientifically significant for the way that the snake's body can change shape and even its organs can change shape? I found that super fascinating.
Absolutely. And actually, it's one of the larger themes of the book. For literally centuries, I think humanity has been fascinated with these, physical metrics of snakes, like how long they are, how deadly the venom might be, and that sort of thing. It's really only been in the last 10 or 15 years where some new technologies have allowed scientists to look at phenomena with much finer grain microscope, if you will. And python digestion turns out to be really fascinating in ways that people have not even begun to imagine. So pythons, as people in Florida almost certainly know, can eat enormous meals in one gulp. The classic comparison is a 140-pound human eating a 220-pound cheeseburger or something like that. It's much larger than their own body weight. How do they process these meals? They knew that they digested them, obviously. They didn't know what was going on until they started looking at the genome, the entire ensemble of genes in the pythons, and they realized that something like 2,000 genes are activated almost from the moment that the animal begins to eat. And it creates enormous biochemical and physiological changes within the organism. Among them, the snake is able to remodel or enlarge the size of crucial organs that are necessary to process the meal. So the heart grows larger. The intestines grow larger, the kidneys grow larger, the liver grows larger, all in the service of processing this huge meal. The heart needs to get bigger because it's digesting this huge influx of triglycerides and animal fats and that sort of thing. The blood almost assumes the consistency of whipped cream. It's so thick. And so the heart has to grow stronger just to pump the blood through the animal. And intestines need to absorb this huge glut of food and energy, and so they become 5 times their normal size, essentially, to process it. But what's really interesting is when the meal is consumed, then the animal knows how to, like a genetic scalpel, carve away all these increases that it's made in its body and restore itself back to normal size. And I think a lot of people think of cold-blooded metabolism. The technical name is ectotherm. The cold-bloodedness is a kind of inferior form of metabolism. But in snakes, it's actually incredibly efficient. You ramp up when you have a meal, and then you ramp down. You don't have to continue to eat to keep the metabolic furnace stoked. mammals and birds and us do all the time. And so they're able to survive at a very low metabolic rate for a long period of time. So pythons can go a year without having a meal, and that's not uncommon in other snakes as well.
And then, I mean, again, I think just the idea that their bodies and even their organs are changing shape to accommodate that, maybe that one annual meal, is, again, just so fascinating, and I found that really jarring as I was reading it. But also, can you speak to the medical implications for us humans about how they do that and what they're doing in the course of that, and what that might speak to for diabetes, let's say, and other things?
Sure. So I should say that this work is still ongoing, and kind of the story is still medical, and scientific story is still unfolding. And the lead researcher, named Todd Pastow at the University of Texas, Arlington, basically, in normal situations, if you had cell proliferation, that is, this wild growth of cells that you would have in increasing the size of the heart, for example, that's often a signal to the body that something is out of control. It's actually very analogous to what happens in a cancer, and many cells have a mechanism to basically shut down and commit suicide in response to the stress of growth that's going on that they can sense. Snakes have this ability to override this kind of cutoff switch that keep growing. They can enlarge these organs. The other piece of this is that they're getting these growth signals that are just overwhelmingly large compared to, say, a human digesting a meal. So one of those growth signals is insulin. The typical response to just overwhelming gushes of insulin is just to become insensitive to it. That's kind of a hallmark type 2 diabetes. And for some reason, the snakes do not develop this kind of insensitivity to the signal of the growth signal of insulin. They just keep producing larger and larger organs to process the meal, and then again, they have this ability to cull away the tissue that they've grown to process the meal. So there's something very interesting about the fact that they can overcome both the anti-cancer response to proliferation of cells, the cutoff switch that normally gets triggered when there's an enormous amount of stress involved with cells rapidly proliferating, and they don't develop this kind of resistance to insulin. There are perhaps some very interesting tricks that the snake has somehow developed to overcome these obstacles that might be applicable to human medicine ultimately.
Yeah, one of many instances in reading your book where I thought snakes are marvels in ways that, other than, you obviously knew this, and others that are working closely and researching one thing or another. But I think just the lay reader, assuming they're not too frightened of snakes or put off by snakes for the wrong reasons, I think we'll find revelation after revelation along these lines over the course of Slither.
They really are kind of very interesting sort of biotechnology innovators. There's another great story out of the sea snake that's off the coast of New Caledonia in the Pacific Ocean. And in the particular locale where these particular sea snakes are located, the waters are like incredibly polluted with like trace metals and stuff like that. And in this particular location, the snakes have adapted to include a kind of darker coloring in their outer skin. It's called melanistic adaptation. What happens is this darker pigment basically sequesters all the poisons and toxins that are in the water so that they don't actually get into the snake. And then when the snake sloughs its skin, as snakes regularly do, they basically shed all the toxins into the water and they don't absorb them at all. And that's a very good example of a local adaptation to a environmental stress that they found an incredible biochemical solution to.
And again, they are problem solvers, these snakes.
Yes, and sometimes quickly. One of the other things that came out of the genomic research is that they kind of identified these, I guess you would call them suites or kind of modules of a number of related genes that can respond fairly quickly in evolutionary terms to changing situations, so that they are, from a evolutionary sense, very nimble creatures. They're nimble just in moving around, but they're also at the genetic level very nimble as well.
Yeah. No, this is, well, I'm going to let folks know who might have just tuned in and I'm not quite sure who they're listening to. Let them know this is Talking Animals on WNF. I'm Duncan Strauss. If you did just tune in, my guest is veteran science journalist Stephen S. Hall, who's also the author of several books. Most recently, and the one we're discussing today on Talking Animals, is Slither, How Nature's Most Maligned Creatures Illuminate Our World. If you have a question for Stephen about snakes or would like to offer a comment, please call 813-239-9663. Email dj@wmnf.org, or you can text 813-433-0885. So just for now, to continue on the python front, there's a bunch of other snakes and issues I certainly want to discuss with you. But as for the pythons in the Everglades and beyond, they're commonly labeled an invasive species. So let's start with you explaining why you don't really love that phrase, invasive species.
Well, I always think invasive implies some sort of cognitive intent, that you intended to invade a territory, a habitat, and I think it's pretty well established that the Florida python population was the result of the pet trade, essentially, and people perhaps abandoning their pets that got established in the Everglades. So it wasn't like the pythons chose to be there. And I think that's true of a lot of invasive species in a lot of instances. It was more human activity and intent or negligence that introduced the species than the intent of the animals themselves. So I think of invasive species as kind of a marketing term that kind of absolves humans of some of their responsibility in creating these situations. I think the Burmese python situation in Florida is a good example of that.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that for a moment, then, since we're sort of on the python topic generally. You report that the problem of pythons rife in South Florida is not only immensely challenging to address, but as one measure of that scope, even experts closest to the situation are unable to really reliably estimate the number of the python population there. Can you expand on how you found, in exploring the python scenario, those kind of challenges, including how freezing temperature in like 2010 may have further complicated matters for the python and trying to contain them, because now they seem to be more fortified if they came through that freeze?
Sure. So as to the general population issue, the main problem is that they're incredibly hard to find. And scientists have developed some, new technologies to sort of track them down a little bit more effectively. But the fact of the matter is they're incredibly difficult to find in the wild. So it's hard to get any kind of reliable census or number. I know that state of Florida officials hope to have something maybe in a 5-year period from now to have a more tenable number in terms of the absolute population. And you see lots of numbers thrown around, but according to the people I spoke with, none of those numbers have a great deal of rigor behind them, so it's really hard to estimate the population. And to the point about the 2010 freeze, it's further complicated by the fact that the freeze was what's known in genetic terms as a bottleneck event. Basically, there's some stress in the environment that is so drastic and so dire that only a few animals are going to be able to squeeze through, and probably because they have some sort of genetic endowment that allows them to do that. And in the case of a freeze, it's likely to be cold hardiness, that there's something in their genetic makeup that allows them to withstand cold a little bit better than maybe some of the other animals. And what likely has happened, and there's some preliminary evidence about this, is it really hasn't been investigated as much as I thought it might be, but there's some preliminary evidence that the snakes who survived the 2010 freeze event in Florida, basically were endowed with this sort of genetic cold hardiness. And as the survivors, they're the ones who are reproducing, proliferating. And so the notion is that the surviving snakes, as the numbers again continue to grow, will carry this cold hardiness trait with them and be able to adapt to possibly colder temperatures as and if they move further north.
And one thing I wasn't clear about that part, Stephen, was they're obviously able to withstand colder temperatures as a result of this process, this bottleneck event you just described. But what I wasn't clear on, are they, in some level, seeking different temperatures, seeking maybe more cold from where they've been in the Everglades and beyond, or just that if they happen to wander somewhere, if it's cold, they'll just be better equipped for it?
I think it's more of the latter, and I think in terms of the good word seeking, what they're seeking is meals.
Yeah.
when they need one, but that possibly that cold hardiness trait may allow them to seek meals at different habitats or different latitudes further north. How far? It's very much up in the air. I know there's a lot of discussion about just exactly how far they have spread, but they've certainly reached Lake Okeechobee and possibly further north. So endowed again with this cold hardiness trait, it's hard to really pin down how far they might spread, but they definitely emerged from the 2010 freeze with some beneficial baggage in terms of how they can spread.
Yeah, and I guess if it's hard to say how many there are, generally it's probably also challenging to pinpoint how many are moving some direction where it's colder, because they're so hard to spot and identify. I guess you'd be hard-pressed to really make any kind of reliable assertion in that direction.
Yeah, I mentioned this in passing in the book. There's a great, it wasn't even an experiment, it was just kind of an exercise. There were about 10 pretty sizable pythons. They're roughly 12 feet each, that were contained in a enclosure in South Carolina that was roughly about the size of, say, a suburban backyard. And they allowed people one by one to go, and by people I mean naturalists, people who are python hunters, people that had experience with it also. Some people are less experienced. Anyway, they would give them like half an hour to go in, see how many snakes they could find. And they couldn't find hardly any. I think there was one or two snakes that were actually identified in this small area where you knew they were there. And in some cases, you had very expert people looking for them and still could not find them. So I thought it was a great example of just how difficult it is to spot these creatures in the wild. There have been instances where people are tracking them with radio transmitters because the snakes have been implanted with a chip. And, they're literally standing on top of the animal and they don't see it because it's so well.
No, they're incredibly hard to track, to spot, to identify, and therefore, obviously, again, their population would just be almost wild guessing at this point, which seems like is the best people are capable of. On the other hand, you did go python hunting with Donna Khalil, a colorful, if not legendary, figure in South Florida python circles. Maybe describe a little bit of your time with her and what you learned. I should probably mention she was a guest on the show a couple of years ago. Great fun to chat with, for sure.
Oh, she has just wonderful stories. She's been incredibly successful. We went out for 2 days, which were not meteorologically helpful to finding snakes. It was kind of a cool front, so we didn't actually identify any pythons. But literally the day after, the week after I went out with her, she sent me a picture with like a 14-foot python draped over her shoulder. So she is a fantastically successful python hunter, and just had tons of stories to tell about. I asked her what it felt like to get bitten by python when you're trying to wrestle with it to catch it. She said it's like getting, stuck with 100 needles all at once. It's a very vivid image.
For sure. And was it her or someone in that same story or an adjacent story that was doing something, and all of a sudden a python was kind of slowly wrapping around their neck, and they had to kind of get help to unfurl the python from them?
Yeah, that was the story that she told me. She had gone out with a couple of pretty well-known herpetologists in South Florida, and she spotted the snake in the Everglades right off the road, and so she jumped into the water to catch it, and as she did it, her phone rang, and so she was holding the snake by the head in one hand, and she was holding the phone. It was her daughter calling her in the other. And while she's talking to her daughter, the rear part of the snake began to wrap around her neck. And she was getting red in the face and having a bit of trouble breathing. She's a free diver, and she said, I can go 2 minutes, so this shouldn't be a big deal. But also that constriction can impair your circulation to the brain and the carotid arteries. And so she had to race out of the water. She couldn't talk, but one of the other people there was alerted to what was going on, and then they slowly unwound the snake from around her neck, which is not hard to do, but you need two hands to do it, and she didn't have two hands at the moment because she'd been on the phone.
Yeah, it's amazing that someone that's been doing it that long and seems to me so confident and experienced would have that happen, because, again, if she weren't on the phone or she didn't run in it, because at the time that she was on the phone with her daughter, I believe she was at least momentarily alone. So if there hadn't been somebody to help, with getting the python unwrapped from her neck, it could have been a very different story. Right.
And as she said, it could happen very quickly because it's not the breathing, it's the circulation through the neck area. And you're right. The two other people she was hunting with had gone back to the car. One was going to get a camera, and the other was going to get a bag or something for the snake. And so their backs were turned when all this was going on, and it happened pretty quickly.
Yeah. Well, again, if something like that can happen to Donna, it just seems like there's an alert there for people who are less practiced than she is. So, I'm moving on from pythons. So, as someone who's obviously, I guess, been long fascinated by snakes, you were kind of attending a herpetology for juniors class or workshop while at Whippersnapper in Michigan, and an adventure with some pals in which you grabbed and took home a ribbon snake. To what extent have you been surprised in preparing for the book, or even beforehand, at the kind of widespread antipathy for snakes? I mean, is it...
I'm constantly surprised at how deep it runs.
Yeah.
For example, there was a review actually of Slither in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend, which was really quite nice. But in the comments section, when people were responding, you just saw this really polar division between people who think they're interesting creatures and people who just can't stand even hearing the word snake, basically.
Yeah.
We actually had a book party over the weekend, and one of my dear friends had to bow out and say she couldn't come because just hearing other people talking about snakes was too anxiety-provoking for her. So there definitely is that reaction.
Yeah.
And it's very deep and pronounced, and in fact, it's really can be a clinically defined condition of a phobia. But again, my hope is that information maybe can temper some of that, and interesting information, and the message that snakes are not out to chase you. In fact, they would like nothing more than to head in the other direction and steer clear of humans.
Be left alone. Yeah.
And be left alone is I think the watchword, and so trying to get that message across, I think is very important. But there's no question that some people have a deep and abiding fear of snakes. So, like many fears, sometimes you just sort of work on it with information and cognition, and maybe you can overcome it.
Yeah. But in addition to the fear, there is the antipathy, and some people just really, I guess, hatred is maybe not too strong a word in this case, because one thing that pops in my mind as we're talking about this, and you're recounting comments from the Wall Street Journal Review and friends at a party or whatever. I thought of the findings that you reported on at one point about people pointing their cars at snakes on the road, like gunning for them, as it were, to try to hit them, versus, if it was any other animal, I think most people, at least animal people, but just generally people, would slow down, would avert them. Some might even help them, depending on what kind of animal it is. And I just found that really striking.
Yeah, it was a very small study. It was done a long time ago, but it was really interesting. These are researchers in Kansas, and they just put a rubber snake out in a basically a country road, a rural road, and either put it in the median strip or in the middle of the lane, and then they just watched how motorists would approach it, and in almost all instances, people would kind of swerve out of their path to hit the snake. So, I mean, it was a small, uncontrolled study that is.
But it reflects. I mean, it was small, and I'm not sure what it meant, but it was interesting just because there's obviously, everybody that was in that study. There's probably X amount of people that feel the same way and would probably try to hit the snake if they had the opportunity. Which, again, it just feels a little alarming to be. I mean, you're safe. You're in a car. There's no risk posed to you, and yet you're still trying to take care of the snake.
Well, there's this really deep human interaction with snakes that I think is unlike almost any other animal.
Yeah.
One of the other interesting tidbits that came up in my research is that there are, according to the Bible, there are only 3 animals capable of talking to humans. There's the eagle in Revelation, there's Balaam's donkey, and most consequentially, there's the snake in the garden. And there just seems to be this dialogue between humans and snakes that cuts very deep to both fear, sin, the kind of unpredictability and volatility of nature in general. And I think in many ancient cultures, snakes were seen as kind of intermediaries between nature and humans, and also intermediaries to the afterworld. So there's just a very deep connection between humans and snakes. And one of the points that I try to make in Slither is that we should pay attention to them, because they're still speaking to us in a sense, both by in their biology and their behavior and what they're telling us about the environment and climate change and all sorts of things like that.
And again, just as I mentioned earlier, just one thing that kind of came through your book to me was just that they are marvels in ways that a lot of us just wouldn't have had occasion to know. And some of the adaptations that you've described, and others that are also in the book that we haven't touched on yet. I mean, it's they're phenoms at times in ways that I don't think people give them credit for, because they're too busy being scared or angry or fearful and missing out on some really fascinating stuff. So, I learned so many things, large and small, in reading this book. For example, you note that pretty much all snakes are considered venomous, even ones as generally, I guess, harmless as the garter snake. That their venom, of course, is really mild, but I don't know that most of us would have understood that pretty much all snakes are venomous to some degree, and that degree varies. It's
interesting you mentioned Donna Khalil earlier, because she told me that the worst snake bite she suffered was from a garter snake, not from a python, because she had an allergic reaction to it. And the main difference is that in what's are considered medically important venomous snakes, like rattlesnakes, coral snakes, and so on, it's the anatomy that actually makes more of a difference than the venom itself, because, excuse me, they have venom glands that are large enough to hold, so it's like a tank of venom, and then they have the musculature around the venom gland and the hypodermic injection of it through the fangs that gives you a huge dose all at once of the venom. That's at least according to this expert on venom, Nicholas Casewell, who's at Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, that the anatomical differences are actually maybe more important than the biochemical differences in the venom.
And also one thing, too, that I found in that section about venom that was just, to me, just loaded with fascinating stuff, is you explained that when someone inadvertently surprises and disturbs a venomous snake, maybe because it was hidden, the resulting, defensive bite may carry more venom than a bite coming from a more direct confrontation. Did I get that right, or is that?
Well, it carries more venom than, say, if they're striking prey for food.
Okay, right. If they're directly facing whatever the other creature is, there's a different amount of venom, and just being surprised that they load it all in at that point, it sounds like.
Yeah, well, it's the difference between, getting, using the venom to subdue prey for food versus what may be, versus threat, basically, but it could be an existential threat to the animal, in this case. And there's a really interesting debate, actually, among herpetologists. Does this represent cognitive control on the part of the snake on how much venom they kind of allot to a particular bite?
Yeah. Yeah, I wondered about that, because it almost seemed like they were deciding on the fly how much to administer. Exactly.
And again, it's not a settled debate, but it's a really interesting debate. Okay, so because there's in any biological creature, there's an economy to how much your energy you're expending to make venom and do stuff like that, or preserving enough venom to be able to defend yourself if there is a threat after you subdued a prey. How conscious, how cognitive, how deliberate is the decision to sort of meter out the amount of venom that you're dispensing during a bite. It's a fascinating kind of scientific debate, but it also speaks to, again, how much more complex these animals probably are than we ever appreciated before.
Absolutely, and certainly, again, as part of that, there's problem solving. I mean, one thing, too, that I thought was very interesting, it involves locomotion, particularly striking for sidewinders, sort of an engineering sensation, really, as you make known. And you can maybe just briefly take us through the efforts to study and sort of recreate the movements of the sidewinder, including the challenge of moving through sand, which was by itself fascinating.
Yeah, well, sidewinders primarily live in sandy desert locations, and especially when there's an uphill incline of sand, it's a very tricky substance to navigate. As anybody who's walked up a sand dune probably knows that, if you have too much weight in one spot, it collapses, and if you don't have enough weight, you can't get you can't make any progress. And they did this elaborate series of experiments. It's actually at Zoo Atlanta. To sort of, they had markers on the snakes. They took, they filmed, where their bodies contacted the ground and how they moved, and they realized that there were the snake is able to orchestrate two separate waves, one of which is kind of longitudinal sideways, but the other is, or maybe horizontal is the way to put it, and the other is vertical. And the amount of body that touches the surface at any given point has to adjust depending on the slope. And other snakes can't do it. the sidewinders make these absolutely minuscule adjustments of weight in order to navigate a sloping, sandy surface. And nobody realized that there were these two waves going on kind of simultaneously that allowed them to do it. But the adjustment on a fly is amazing. One of the other aspects of snake locomotion that I found really interesting is that unlike virtually any other terrestrial creature, land-based creature, if the habitat or the landscape you're traversing is filled with obstacles, that you slow down. You have to pick your way through it. Snakes use obstacles as accelerants. They actually go faster in this particular situation. So they're able to use obstacles, or in a larger metaphorical sense, adversity, to get to where they want to go even quicker. That's an interesting trait.
Well, speaking of that, I want to get into their navigation and get additional problem-solving skills, but I do want to get a caller involved. We're starting near the end of our time here. Hi, you're on Talking Animals with Stephen Hall.
Is it me?
Yes, it is. Please go ahead.
Oh, hi, thanks. This is Jackie. I'm calling from Sarasota. I find this show absolutely fascinating, and I have a story about my son who was bit by a baby rattlesnake. It was in southern Oregon, and we had moved from New York, so they were used to being able to play with the little garter snakes out in the backyard. And these other kids were throwing rocks at it. He picked it up to throw it in the bush, and that snake bit him on the forefinger of his left hand. And my understanding is that a baby hasn't learned how to regulate the flow of venom. They just keep shooting it out. And so anyhow, we ended up taking him. His hand started blowing up like a balloon. We took him down to a local clinic. They administered anti-venom, took him to the hospital up in Grants Pass, and he was in there for about 3 days. They put him in a crib with a slats across the top, and they wrapped his arm so that his hand was way up ahead above him, so everything could drain out. And I said, what's the worst possible outcome here? He said, well, we just keep doing that venous return on the fingertips, and if the circulation stops, we would have to open up the forearm till the swelling goes down. Anyhow, he said, I have a gut feeling we won't have to do that, and they never did. But,
I'm glad it all worked out. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
All right, Jackie, we're going to run because we're almost at the end of our time here chatting with Stephen.
Okay,
I got a couple.
I was just wondering if he knew for sure if that's a thing with babies, that they don't know how to regulate the venom yet.
I know that
snakes.
that is the kind of the prevailing thought, but I also know that there's some disagreement on that. So I don't think it's entirely a settled question.
Oh, okay.
But what a dramatic story, and I'm glad your son...
glad it all ended up okay.
It's still with us.
Well, that's great. Well, tell him hello for us. We're going to run now, but thanks so much for your call and your story, Jackie. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, so back to the navigation and problem-solving skills. Another experiment conducted by scientists that you report about wondered about snake behavior when they approached a road and explored how they'd react to a pickup truck zoom by. And basically, I don't know if you want to just quickly respond to what they found through that, because I thought that was really interesting, again, to show these creatures are smart.
Well, they actually used 9 different species, and they just started to see how they responded to when they approached a road. I would say the most interesting thing about it was that all of them went straight across the road perpendicularly, like at a right angle to the shoulder. They didn't sort of wander or go sideways or at a 60-degree angle. Somehow they all were able to go straight across. And part of the thinking of that was just to get to some kind of cover, because the main concern is not so much pickup trucks, although that vehicle accidents with snakes happen a lot, but it's more that avian predators, birds from above, can really spot a snake in an open road. So that there may be a reason that they go across the road.
Keep it short. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
As short as possible. Exactly.
All right. Well, our caller mentioned rattlesnakes, and I thought we should at least touch on this story. Maybe we only just have maybe a minute or less left, but one, again, further surprising information that you touched on is the social network of certain rattlesnakes that make me wonder, like, there's rattlesnake moms that care for their young after birth, and then they seem to want to spend time with certain females rather than other females in that general cohort, I guess. And then they recruit some of these lady serpents in the immediate circle to babysit their youngsters. I thought, this sounds almost brushing up against elephant territory more than what I would have thought rattlesnake territory.
Well, it's all these findings derive from the fact that it's a technological development, but it's been around for about 30 years now, or a little bit more. But being able to put a chip in a snake allows you to identify an individual snake. It's not just a rattlesnake that's out there, but you know exactly which rattlesnake it is. You've numbered it. You can track where it goes and how it behaves. Emily Taylor, who's at Cal Polytechnic University in California, has done a lot of work on this and really interesting tracking how snakes hang out with certain snakes, avoid other snakes, how certain rattlesnakes, feel threatened when humans are nearby. Others seem to be more chill, if you will. And she's led an effort to actually put, it's called RattleCam. Your listeners might be interested in just logging on to RattleCam, because there are these fixed cameras on rattlesnake dens, and you can see the snakes interacting and coming out of the den and that sort of stuff. It's really fascinating stuff, and there's an element of citizen science incorporated into it too. So it's very interesting to see how these animals interact socially.
For sure. And there's so many things we didn't get to that I found also interesting in the book, including a whole voyage through the book included a stop on snake genitalia, which I wouldn't have expected necessarily, and many other things. But we're out of time at this point. But we've been speaking with Stephen S. Hall. His new book is Slither, How Nature's Most Malign Creatures Illuminate Our World. And you can get that as of now. It just came out about a week or so ago. You get that wherever you get your books. Stephen, thanks so much for joining us today on Talking Animals. And it goes without saying that I found the book wonderful and fascinating, and I wish you good luck with it.
Thank you very much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. In a moment, I'll speak with H.H. German, the creator of Calico, the first comic book hero committed to fighting animal abuse. He'll fill us in on a new Calico chapter book featuring the work of two comic book heavyweights. More on that in a moment. Right now, we're going to step into the comedy corner with a snake piece from a Talking Animals favorite. Here's Joe Zimmerman with part one of a piece called Pet Snakes in today's Comedy Corner on Talking Animals on WMNF.
I have a phobia of snakes. That's normal. It's weird that people have pet snakes when there's so many fluffy pet options available. How does that go? You want the puppy, wants to be your best friend. It's a rescue. Or you could get the cold-blooded reptile that's banging its head against the glass. Sure looks like it hates you. It's the opposite of a rescue. It's an attack. It's actually what we rescued the rescue from, so that's why we keep them separated with bulletproof glass. Oh, you want more information on the limbless serpent? That surprises me. Let's see. I know it has infrared vision like the predator monster. And it's been the symbol for evil since the beginning of time. Which seems like a red flag.
That was Joe Zimmerman here on Talking Animals in the Comedy Corner with a piece called Pet Snakes. The first part of an extended piece on that, taken from his album Smiling at Wolves. Now it's time to talk with H.H. German, the creator of Calico, about a new development in the realm of this comic book hero committed to fighting animal abuse. Here's H.H. German back on Talking Animals on WMNF. Good morning, H.H. H.H.?
Yes, I'm here. Good morning.
Okay, good morning. Great, there you are. How's it going? Thanks for joining us again on Talking Animals.
Absolutely. Thank you for having Sigma Comics, and we're ready to talk comics and fighting animal cruelty.
Cool. So for those unfamiliar with Calico, give us a brief synopsis of his story, his background, and what he sort of became, and what we know of him so far.
Sure. Hector Gill is the Calico. He gets intel every day on people who abuse and kill animals, and he goes after them with extreme justice. He is the ultimate defender of animals, and he's based in New York City.
Well, that's cool. And so, who wrote and drew the earlier iterations of Calico?
So I'm the creator of the Calico, Hector Gill, and the universe of Sigma Comics. And the artist is Renato Pinto. We do have Javier Orovich as well. And we have a new book coming out. It's called Calico Street Math and Neck. The cover on that is drawn by the legendary comic book artist Klaus Janson, who, along with Frank Miller, worked on Batman Dark Knight Returns, the seminal comic book in the comic book industry.
Wow, that sounds super impressive. How did that collaboration come about? How did they sort of enter the Calico world?
Yeah, well, another creator, Mike Barron, who, along with Klaus Janson, worked on the Punisher #1 series back in '87, the following year. They both, the latter, Mike Barron, is my mentor. So the Punisher being a Marvel Comics property, he goes after the bad guys in a terminal way. He was an inspiration for the character. Well, turns out Mike Barron, the writer, he came across a copy of Calico, and of course, he, having worked with Klaus Janson in the past, both of them sort of looked at the work and were inspired to create, and here we are with the book coming out on Kickstarter tomorrow, May 1st.
So talk about how that Kickstarter works, and that seems to be kind of the process that precedes the release of the Calico books and comic books and other parts of the series.
Yep, Kickstarter is a crowdfunding platform. It's actually the most popular one online. You go to Kickstarter.com, and there you can search for a number of creative projects. In this case, this is a comic book project. So we are crowdfunding for all of our issues. This latest issue is called Calico Morality Play. And again, it does feature Klaus Janson on the cover. It also has Mike Barron on one of the stories. And of course, yours truly, H.H. Sherman, the creator and writer. It's a 176-page book featuring the Calico going after people who abuse animals. And all you have to do is go to Kickstarter.com and search Calico Morality Play, and you'll find the book and you'll support it starting tomorrow, May 1st through May 31st.
That's great. Well, that sounds cool. And meanwhile, I know Calico has been very popular in all kinds of settings, Comic-Cons and other conventions, etc. So Calico has really spoken to many people, I think, over the years.
Absolutely. Lots of people who love and care about animals now know that there's a superhero, really, i.e. an anti-hero, that goes after people who abuse animals. And, the truth is, empirical data shows that anytime you create anything and put it out there in the zeitgeist, it does have a direct impact on pop culture, popular culture. And we always point to things like, the Jeffersons, Mary Tyler Moore Show, Will and Grace. Anytime there's some kind of social, commentary that we want to sort of get out there in the zeitgeist, the more you create pop culture for it, the more the population responds. And that's why we're proud of Here Comes Calico.
That's great. Well, congratulations. Good luck with the Kickstarter, and we'll check in with you next time. Thanks so much, H.H.
Thank you so much, Duncan. I appreciate you so much for supporting our fight against animals.
Absolutely. Keep up the good work. Thank you so much. We have just about reached the end of today's edition of Talking Animals on WMNF Tampa. The conversation's coming up next. The great show hosted by Mario Nunez and Joe King Carter. And after that, it's The Scoop, WMNF's brief news recap. Then we shift back to music program with Jim Bannon, holding forth from 1 to 3, followed by Nancy C., hosting the Wednesday Traffic Jam from 3 to 6, at which point a terrific Wednesday night block of Latin music kicks in. And we'll be back next week with another edition featuring Katrina Shaddix, founder of Bear Warriors United. Timely conversation about the forthcoming proposed bear hunt, etc. And We'll talk to you then. It's Talking Animals on WNO Tampa. Thanks.